Hi, everyone. First off, I want to apologize that I was not able to have this call live. My intention was to make it an interactive workshop to be able to answer questions, address any facts that you had questions about. But unfortunately, I was having some tech issues. But long story short, they're all resolved, and I still do want this to have an interactive component. So as you're watching this, if anything comes up question-wise, please be sure to pop your questions into the hashtag Thrive Together channel in Slack, and I'm more than happy to answer them. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Cassie Carpenter. I am a part of Brightly Thrive's Workplace Wellbeing Initiative. I have my Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry, and I'm also a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, which is really just a fancy way of saying that I'm a total foodie and I want to feel good about what I'm eating as well. So before we begin diving into the data and all of the myths that we'll be busting, I want to preface this presentation by saying that anything that I'm sharing with you today is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a medical degree. So I want you to always consult with your healthcare team before making any changes to your diet or your health regimen, or if you're feeling inspired by anything that we talk about, definitely loop them in, especially more so if you already have existing health conditions or health concerns. And then additionally, because we are talking about food, some of the information that's discussed, it might be triggering for some people. There's individuals out there that have food sensitivities, they have possible eating disorders or issues just related to nutrition and diet. And so if that is the case, I want you to prioritize your well-being and seek support if you need to. If you need resources around that, definitely let me know. Noelle and I have a few resources that we can point you to. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. 1 second here. Make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. So we're going to be just kind of cracking down on some of the myths that we've all heard around nutrition. And the number one myth that I've heard over time and time again are that all fats are unhealthy. Um, and the fact is that the quality of fats that we consume is actually what's crucial, not the quantity. And some of these myths might present in other ways. So all fats are unhealthy has also been expressed as fat in my food equates to fat on my body. Sometimes we might hear things like saturated fats cause heart disease, or cholesterol-rich foods are unhealthy. Low-fat diets help you lose weight. Fat isn't needed in our diet. All fat food or fat-free and low-fat foods are healthy. Fat raises blood sugar levels. Eating fat can increase your diabetes risk. And margarine and omega-6 rich oils are healthier. So these are all different ways that this myth kind of perpetuates in society and in the food and health industry. And I want to share a very unpopular but indisputable fact with you, and that is that fats are absolutely necessary in the body. They are required for certain metabolic processes and are used as building components within the body, from brain structure and function to hormone production. In fact, the human brain, our brains are nearly 60% fat. So that right there tells you that we need to have some fat in our diet if we want to have cognition, the ability to think, to be able to prevent dementia and Alzheimer's and all the things. Another shocking fact that I like to share with people is that saturated fats are actually the preferred fuel for our heart. So this is completely contrary to everything that we've been told. And the thing to note here, and this is kind of a side note, is that Doctors in the medical field actually get less than 20 hours of nutrition education in all their years of medical school. And the research that is currently out and showing that fats are actually very healthy for our body, um, it doesn't hit clinics and practices, medical practices, for about 10 years. So the data that's out there that's new and the research that's out there that's new, it actually doesn't get implemented into practices for about 10 years. So most doctors are about 10 years behind the research. And so, what we are seeing is that there are doctors that are seeing this research and are trying to branch off from Western medicine. So, there are several cardiologists out there that have branched off and done more of a functional medicine approach because they've seen that fat and the importance of fat in the diet and how detrimental the low fat diet was for Americans. So a few of these practitioners out there are Dr. Jack Wolfson, who's also known as the paleocardiologist, and Dr. William Davis, the founder of Wheat Belly. So they both recognize the importance of including high quality fat, healthy fats into our diet, and the detriment that this low fat, high carb dietary protocols that are all out there have done to Americans. To boot, there was a comprehensive study done by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that reviewed all the research papers out there that were done on saturated fats and found that there was absolutely no correlation between saturated fats and heart disease. So this is contrary to all of the information we've been given about the role of fats in heart disease, the role of fats in obesity, and just the role of fats in general. You know, fats have been demonized. So the main takeaway I want you to walk away with from this myth is that it's the quality of the fat that you're eating that's important. It's not the quantity. So there is a huge difference between the saturated fat that you get from a deep fried onion ring compared to the saturated fat that's found in organic coconut oil. So if you want to consider adding and upping your healthy fats, you're going to want to look at things like grass-fed meats, wild-caught seafood, pastured eggs, pastured chickens, healthy fats like extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, and even walnut oil. Some other things to note about fats is that, you know, like I said, they are absolutely a necessity when it comes to optimal health. So, in fact, most Americans are fatty acid deficient because we're eating the wrong kinds of fats. So, these are just some of the ways that fats are required for us to even function every day. So, every single cell membrane in our body is made up of a phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid bilayer is actually composed of fat. And then fats are also necessary for us to even be able to absorb fat soluble vitamins. So that's going to be vitamins A, D, E, and K. So the fat-free skim milk that we're taught to buy and to, you know, drink to stay healthy, that's fortified with vitamin D. That vitamin D doesn't even make it into our cells or our body because there's no fat in the milk for us to be able to absorb that vitamin D. So we're paying extra money for a fortified product, a vitamin fortified product, but we're getting zero benefits from it. It's a marketing gimmick, and that's a whole nother presentation I could do. Every single one of our nerve cells is covered in something called a myelin sheath, and that is made of fat as well. And then back to the 60% of our brain being made of fat, it helps us function, it helps us think, it helps all the things that go on inside of our body. And then ketones, which are derived from fat molecules, are the preferred fuel source of our heart cells. So our heart loves to fuel itself with ketones. And it's even, you know, those ketones are also a part of how our body likes to metabolize and create energy as well. Fat is even needed to drive down inflammation in our bodies. So when we don't have enough healthy essential fats in our body, we get stuck in inflame mode and it gets really hard to turn that switch off. And so people end up with chronic inflammation, chronic illness, and all kinds of other issues. We also need fat to regulate our body temperature. And fat is a precursor for every single hormone in our body. So, cholesterol, which has also been demonized, is a waxy, fatty substance. And that is the precursor for every single hormone that is created in our body from, the hormones that regulate our sex drive, the hormones that regulate our thyroid, the hormones that regulate our mood. So, those are all derived from fats. We also know that fat helps regulate our body temperature. So we need visceral fat around our organs, around different parts of our body to help regulate body temperature, especially if we're living in cold areas within the United States or internationally. So, it has a lot of different purposes, but I think what really is my favorite thing about fat is the fact that it makes food taste delicious. So real food that has naturally occurring fats tastes delicious, right? We're talking about like a great marbled steak or bacon or avocados, things like that. When we start removing fat from food that's naturally present, what happens is it starts to taste really, really bad. And so the way the food manufacturers make that food more palatable is by dumping a bunch of sugar into it. So you'll see that there are a lot of fat-free products that are touted as healthy. When you look at the ingredients label, there's a ton of sugar in them just to make them palatable because they do taste god awful when you start taking out the fat in it. All right, the next myth on our list is the sugar-free craze we've seen take over America. So the myth is that sugar-free products are healthier alternatives. And, I have fallen for this one. I've fallen for all of these. So, when I started learning about nutrition, about food, about the food manufacturing industry, I got really, really ticked off. And this is exactly why I like to present this information to people because it's important, number one, for our health. Number two, it helps us become better consumers. And number three, it helps us help others within our families and communities stay healthy as well. So getting back to the sugar-free piece, sugar's become public enemy number one. I think we've all heard, too much sugar is terrible for you. Too much sugar can, cause obesity. It can cause diabetes. And so the food manufacturers understand that as American consumers, we're becoming more health conscious. We're on to some of the things that they're doing, right? Dumping a bunch of sugar into some of these low-fat foods to make them more palatable. They add them to all kinds of things like, chewing gum and breath mints and sodas and alcoholic beverages, dairy products, salad dressings, cough syrups. I mean, sugar is ubiquitous for the most part. So what they have done is, they're wanting to meet the demands of us because we're asking for things to not have so much sugars, but we still want the taste, right? Because they're not going to put the fat back in. So what happens is they start utilizing these artificial sweeteners. And the artificial sweeteners are things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, acesulfame potassium, which is usually abbreviated as ACE-K. So these are the kinds of things you're going to want to look at in the ingredient labels when you're buying things like yogurt, breakfast cereal, snacky types foods, soups, desserts, candies, salad dressings, all those things. They're advertised as sugar free, but what we don't really aren't really told is that these sugar free, you know, chemical laden sweeteners are actually slowly poisoning us in many different ways. So what we have seen through clinical research is that our body still senses and responds hormonally to artificial sweeteners the same way that our body responds to sugar. So we think that we are, doing something great for our body, but it's still causing blood sugar swings. It still causes cravings. It still causes unhealthy weight gain, and it still causes an altered gut microbiome, which is another way of saying the bacteria that lives inside of our digestive tract that helps us digest and break food down and create hormones is impacted just as much by artificial sweeteners as it is by just plain sugar. So the compounds that are used in alternative sweeteners can cause other issues too. They're able to cross the blood-brain barrier. They are metabolized differently in the body. Some of the byproducts of artificial sweeteners are formaldehyde. So we're actually creating a formaldehyde byproduct in our body by metabolizing some of these artificial sweeteners. It affects our gut, like I told you, with our microbiome, the good bacteria that's in there. It alters it. It affects our brain in the ways of depression, migraines. People that have fibromyalgia typically find out that they're very sensitive to artificial sweeteners, and that some people, when they cut those artificial sweeteners out of their diet, they actually see a remission in their fibromyalgia symptoms. So regular consumption of these artificial sweeteners also lowers our metabolism overall. So, despite the fact that they are touted as low calorie, as low sugar or no sugar, we are starting to see that people that consume copious amounts of these products or products that have these sweeteners are actually gaining weight and suffering from things like type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So, they're not all that they're cracked up to be. Some common problems that we're seeing with consuming things like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, and ACE-K are blood sugar swings, increased cravings, unhealthy weight gain, the disruption in gut microbiome, cognitive issues. So it's been linked to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, hormonal imbalances, depression, migraines, and again, it lowers your metabolism. So there's a lot of problems associated with the sweeteners that we are not being told about, right? And we're seeing it as evidence in society, right? If we look across the board, the kinds of issues that people that are consuming these products are experiencing. Myth number 3, all salt is the same and table salt is just as good as sea salt. So I really love this myth and I really love to bust this myth because when we start to look at the study that was done about salt and the link to hypertension, we start to see these major flaws in the way data is presented to US consumers. So this myth, again, I love salt, and this myth is one that really upset me when I learned about it and learned about the study that fueled some of the legislation and some of the health mandates that were put out regarding salt consumption because it was, again, flawed. So salt in general just received a really, really bad reputation back in the 70s due to a study released by a man named Lewis Dahl. So in this study, he, quote, showed unequivocal evidence that salt caused hypertension. Now, mind you, he was feeding laboratory rats 500 grams of sodium a day to support this study. Now, the average American consumes maybe 2.5 to 5 grams of salt a day. He was feeding these laboratory rats 500 grams of salt and saying that it caused hypertension and high blood pressure. So, based on this study, the United States Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs recommended that Americans begin cutting salt out of their diet by 50 to 85% based on that study, which is largely flawed. I mean, no person in their right mind eats 500 grams of salt, let alone, compares what's happening in a rat's body, which is much smaller than ours, and then translates that over to human health and human nutrition. So again, even with the decrease that we've seen in salt recommendations, we've only seen the rate of hypertension go up over the years to the point where 1 in 2 people is diagnosed with it. And even inside of nursing homes where they do low salt to no salt, people in the nursing homes still have hypertension. So something is not right. Something's not lining up. If we're removing salt from the diet and salt is the thing that's causing hypertension, then why are we still seeing this increase in hypertension? So when it comes, oops, went too far. When it comes to salt, the mistake that most of us has made is using table salt. And the reason table salt is not that great is because it's been completely stripped of all of the trace minerals that help keep it balanced. So when we look at sea salt, it is very, very balanced. It has over 84 different trace minerals, and every single one of those trace minerals are needed by our body for a variety of functions. When we look at table salt, it is literally just sodium and chloride, sometimes iodine if it's iodized salt, and then some anti-caking agents to allow it to flow when it's being poured out. So when we're comparing these two things, it's like comparing apples to oranges, right? We're talking about table salt that has 2 elements in it compared to sea salt that has over 84 elements present in it that help balance our electrolytes, that help allow our muscles to contract and move, that help keep the pH of our blood balanced. So table salt is not the thing we should be eating. So it's not salt that's bad, it's table salt. So we have to be very specific when we're talking about the goods and the bads. When we use sea salt again has all of those minerals present in it that help neutralize your internal environment when it comes to your blood. Again, it balances out your electrolytes, helps your neurons fire. It has a lot of benefits to it. When we do table salt and we're salting our food with table salt, what happens is it actually pulls minerals from our mineral reserves inside of our body. So our mineral reserves are things like our bones, our teeth, and our heart. There's lots of minerals inside of these organs and body parts. And when we consume table salt, it starts to pull away those minerals from those parts of our body in order to process it because it's so nutritionally devoid. It also causes our body to retain water, which we know can lead to salt crystallization inside of our kidneys, inside of our gallbladder, and inside of our joints. And when we start to get water retention caused by consuming table salt, that water retention results in high blood pressure. So it's not the sea salt that's the problem, it's the table salt. So it's the kind of salt that we're using. So when we look at real salt, we realize that none of these issues are present when we consume healthy amounts of real salt. It's very, very balanced. It's balanced with other minerals. It doesn't affect the pH of our blood. It actually helps build up the mineral reserves inside of our bones, our teeth, and our heart. And these mineral reserves are constantly being depleted by stress, by sweat, by illnesses, and by normal metabolic functions. So it's really, really important that we stay on top of introducing trace minerals into our body. It also doesn't lead to water retention, and therefore it doesn't affect your blood pressure. So one of the more popular types of sea salts that I like to recommend is pink sea salt. It's very, very colorful, and that's due to the rich mineral content that's inside of it. There's plenty of other types of sea salts that are out there too that you can use. They range in colors from white to pink to black, and you can have a little bit of fun by choosing different ones because they all have different mineral profiles. So what I personally like to do is I like to try a new one after I've gone through a container of one in order to expose my body to new and unique mineral profiles. So, there's Himalayan sea salt, there's French sea salt, there's Celtic sea salt, Maldon salt, Baja salt. So you can have a lot of fun with, trying out these different types of sea salt in your cooking. Our fourth myth is all about coffee. So I know this one's probably pretty popular just because coffee is one of the most widely consumed beverages in the entire world. But one of the things that we don't get a lot of education around is the type of coffee that we're drinking. So most people believe that coffee is coffee, right? It's all the same. But the fact of the matter is that conventional coffee has tons of mold and tons of pesticide residues in it, which for people that have chronic health issues or autoimmune conditions, this is a terrible, terrible thing to be introducing to our body. And even if you don't have those things, you don't want to, add toxins into your body because they're really hard to get out when we're not feeling well, or if we're stressed, or if we're just not healthy optimally. So again, it is the most widely consumed beverage in the entire world. Sadly, it's the most antioxidant-rich food consumed in the standard American diet. So there are all kinds of antioxidant-rich foods out there, superfoods, but coffee is the most widely consumed one in terms of what Americans consume. So the benefits of coffee have been widely researched as well as the drawbacks. And there's a lot of information out there about whether or not somebody should drink coffee and whether or not they shouldn't. But the fact of the matter is, it's really just dependent on the person and what their health conditions are. But I do like to go back to this quote by Dr. Mark Hyman. He is the physician and founder of the Ultra Wellness Center. And he states that if you are, quote, sick, inflamed, hormonally imbalanced, nutritionally compromised, overworked, stressed out, fatigued, depressed, and toxic, that coffee is not part of the medicine required for your healing. So that says a lot about coffee and about the quality of coffee that you're drinking too, because if we're drinking coffee that's loaded with pesticide residues and mold, we're just dumping more fuel onto the fire and causing ourselves to become sicker and sicker and raising what we call our toxic load. But if coffee is just one of those things that you can't give up, or you're just not quite there yet, and don't even want to like consider the notion of giving it up, then what I want to recommend is that you actually care about the quality of the coffee that you're drinking because you want to lower your toxic burden, not raise it, right? Like we don't want to dump more kerosene onto these little fires that are going on inside of our body. And so one of the ways we can take care of doing that by drinking coffee is to choose organic coffee. We also want to choose coffee that is shade grown. And, when we choose coffee that's high quality, organic, and shade grown, it lowers the amount of pesticide residues that are on it. Also, if you're drinking decaf, one of the things you want to look for in your decaf coffee is that it's decaffeinated using the Swiss water method. So, what a lot of people don't realize is that when they decaffeinate coffee beans, they're actually using heavy duty solvents, something called hexane, that's incredibly toxic to humans. We're not even supposed to be consuming it, but those residues are still on the coffee beans. They use that solvent to decaffeinate the beans. And so the beans are now soaked in this solvent, and then we are literally, brewing it down into this concentrated liquid that we're drinking. So it's really, really important to be informed about what we're putting into our body. And it's important to make healthy choices when we now know better, right? So when we're using things like decaffeinated coffee or conventional coffee, what we're doing is increasing the level of inflammation that's already inside of our body. And I know a lot of us are dealing with health issues, are stressed, and just dealing with all the things. And so these are just ways to kind of mitigate some of the inflammation and ways that we can care for ourselves in these small little doses. One more thing to note about coffee is that it is what we call a diuretic. So, coffee, along with juices, sodas, caffeinated teas, these are all diuretics, meaning that they cause our body to flush more water through our kidneys, which increases our need to urinate. So, I know if we've had a cup of coffee, then we are very, very familiar with the urge to have to go to the bathroom after we've had a cup. So, this water loss that we experience from diuretics, it actually flushes out electrolytes, it flushes out minerals, vitamins, especially B complex vitamins. We also lose a lot of magnesium, zinc, calcium, and potassium when we drink diuretics. So when we lose those kinds of components through diuretics, what happens is you can end up with muscle cramps, heart palpitations, decreased immune function, and low energy levels. So we want to offset the dehydrating effects of diuretic beverages by increasing our overall water consumption. So there's a fun little math problem I like to use to stay hydrated, and that is taking our ideal body weight. So, if we are an individual who's trying to lose weight or we are overweight, we don't want to take that weight because there is such thing as over consuming water. And what happens is kind of the same thing as diuretics. We start to flush out electrolytes, flush out minerals. So we want to drink what we call an ideal amount of water, and that's based on your ideal weight in pounds. So you divide that by two, and that should be the amount of ounces that you're drinking daily. Now, if you're drinking caffeinated beverages or alcoholic beverages, which are both diuretics, then what you want to do is take the amount of caffeinated or alcoholic beverages that you're drinking and multiply that by 1.5 to come up with the additional amounts of ounces of water you should be consuming every day. So, for example, if your ideal weight is 150 pounds, you divide that by two, and that's 75 ounces of water you should be aiming for daily. If you drink 12 ounces of coffee every day, you multiply your 12 ounces of coffee by 1.5, and that gives you 18 ounces. So that's 18 more ounces of water you should be drinking daily to account for the fact that you are drinking a diuretic. So you take your 75 ounces from your ideal body weight, your 18 ounces from the diuretics that you're drinking, add them together, and you should be aiming for 93 ounces of water needed daily. Now, I recognize that some people have lots and lots of cups of coffee, and at some point, you can't even keep up with the amount of water that you're flushing out of your body. So it's important to be mindful of the amount of diuretics that you're drinking in addition to the quality. Okay. All right, last but not least, this one is probably one of my favorites, and it's related to the fat myth that we talked about in myth number one. But This myth is that canola oil is a heart healthy oil. Now, when I learned about this myth, let me just say I was incredibly disappointed. I was angry. I was um, almost in denial because my family and I had been using canola oil for so long. And then when you go and look at all of the packaged foods that are out there, it's literally in everything. That's another thing that's ubiquitous, along with sugar, is canola oil. So it's actually really detrimental to your health. It's produced using solvents and high pressure, which I'll get into why that is not great for liquid at room temperature types of oils. But that refining process is what creates trans fats. And I think all of us now know that trans fats are incredibly detrimental to our health. They've been removed for the most part from foods. There are some loopholes where they are allowed to be in certain foods and they don't have to be disclosed on the nutrition label, but that's a whole nother workshop I would give. um, my point here is to just educate you about things that are found in your kitchen pantry. And I'm pretty sure a majority of you probably have canola oil in your pantry because it is touted as heart healthy. We've been encouraged to consume it. It's in all kinds of packaged foods. So, contrary to what most of us have been told and what most of us believe, um, fats in general, when we talk about fats, there is no such thing as a 100% purely saturated fat or a 100% purely polyunsaturated fat. They're actually a mixture of polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and saturated fats. So when I look at coconut oil, it's not all saturated fat. It has some polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats in there. When I look at olive oil has saturated fats along with polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. So all fats are a mixture of these different types of fats. And saturated doesn't mean bad. So again, this has been, saturated fat's been given such a bad rep, but the only time it is bad is when you're choosing poor quality meats, refined seed oils, and hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils. So keep those two terms in mind, the hydrogenated and partially hydrogenated, because those are key words for trans fats. So you might look at something, a nutrition label that says 0 grams of trans fats in it, but if you see hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oil in the ingredient label, there is in fact trans fats there. They just are not disclosed on the nutrition label. So another hack there for you to look at while you're grocery shopping. But unfortunately, for most people consuming the standard American diet, one of the most widely used cooking oils on the market today is filled with the hydrogenated trans fatty acids that I just talked about, and that is canola oil. And the reason it has those is through that the refining process. So if an oil is not cold pressed or extra virgin, then it's refined using high temperatures, it's refined using chemicals, and it's refined using deodorization. So all of these processes are incredibly harmful to our body. And canola oil, which is originally high in omega-3s, which is healthy, we need omega-3s along with omega-6s and omega-9s in our body. When it is processed, it becomes really, really rancid and smelly when it's exposed to oxygen. So as it's being exposed to oxygen and it's going through the refining process and it's going through being put under high pressure and they're using solvents to extract the oil from the rape seeds, then what happens is you get this batch of really stinky, smelly oil and nothing that anybody would ever want to cook with. And so then they put it through a deodorization process in order to remove the smells. And what happens is those healthy omega-3s are then converted to trans fats. So now this bottle of canola oil that doesn't have a smell really is put on the shelf at the grocery store, and it's actually chock full of trans fats, which we know are absolutely horrible for our health. They cause cancer, heart disease, chronic illness, and all kinds of other disease. So it's really important to know the truth about canola oils. There's an entire website dedicated to the canola oil refining process, and you could watch the videos and see how absolutely disgusting it is. And it's incredible the kinds of things that we don't have education around and we're not educated about, and then we go out and buy it because it's sold to us as a health product. So this is a chart that shows you commonly used culinary oils and fats. So this is what I was talking about when I said that every single fat and oil that's out there is a mixed percentage of saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. So polyunsaturated fats are the omega-3s and omega-6s. So as you're looking at this, you can see like, wow, yeah, there's some that have way more saturated fats than others, some that have more monounsaturated fats, but they're all a mixture, right? So there's no one fat that's truly 100% saturated or 100% polyunsaturated. And when I saw this, it was like a light bulb going off. I had no idea that fats were composed this way. But what I want you to notice as you're going from this list and you're looking from the top of the list down towards the bottom, what we start to see is that the oils become more and more unstable in terms of heat and light sensitivity. So the more saturated a fat is, the better it can hold up to high heat. So the saturated part is what allows it to withstand high heat and cooking temperatures. So when we start to go down this list, we're seeing that saturated fat's better for high temperature cooking and baking. But as we start going further and further down, the oils start to become more and more destabilized as they're exposed to heat and light. And what's at the very, very bottom of this list? Canola oil, right? So that means that it's incredibly heat and light sensitive. That means that it starts to break down when it's exposed to heat and light. That means it becomes rancid when it starts to get exposed to heat and light. So our most stable fats are going to be solid at room temperature. So towards the top, you'll see things like coconut oil, lard, my grandparents use lard, bacon grease, all those things, right? Grass-fed butters, grass-fed ghee, coconut oil, red palm oil. The most unstable oils are always liquid at room temperature and should never, never, ever be used for cooking, with the exception of high quality extra virgin olive oil. Um, Extra virgin olive oil has something called polyphenols in it that help protect it from the heat and from the light. So that's why you're allowed you should cook with olive oils in addition to the more solid, stable fats. So the most unstable oils are going to be liquid at room temperature again. And where do we find most of these liquid room temperature oils? At the supermarket. We see them in clear plastic bottles being exposed to light, and hopefully the store is room temperature and not super hot. But in a warehouse, you've got these oils sitting in these clear bottles in a hot warehouse. So by the time these liquid liquid room temperature cooking oils are put in the grocery store, they're already rancid. And at this point, when you're thinking about the way things are advertised and marketed to us, you can get really angry about it. I know I was, and that's why I decided to go into nutrition. And that's why I decided to pursue, certifications in the health and wellness field to become more educated about this stuff, because it's angering. It's angering to know that we're given these kinds of things with absolutely no context and that we should trust the people that are making it, right? But now we know that we are, it's our job to advocate for ourselves and to educate ourselves. So I hope you guys found this presentation enlightening. And again, if any questions come up or you want any of the studies or any of the papers that are associated with today's presentation, definitely let me know. And let me know what you thought about all of this too in the Thrive Together channel in Slack. All right. So just to wrap things up, I want to recap the takeaways here from today's presentation. And then again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Thrive Together Slack channel. I am more than happy to answer them. So the quality of the fats, not the quantity of the fats, is what's important. So we're talking about the kinds of fats that we're consuming, grass-fed beef, wild-caught seafood, pastured eggs. Those are the kinds of fat that we should be consuming, and not the ones that are low quality and come from low quality foods or packaged foods. Artificial sweeteners. Now we know, right? Now we know the truth that sugar-free doesn't mean healthy, that artificial sweeteners can harm our metabolism and contribute to different and varying diseases. We also now know the benefits of sea salt and why we should choose sea salt over table salt. Conventional coffee is not the one to opt for. We want to aim for organic shade-grown coffee to avoid mold and pesticides, because over 91.7% of coffee beans out there test positive for mold. So if you've ever read about just people that have mold exposure, it's really, really hard to get over, and it takes a lot of medicine and a lot of time to get mold out of your system. And then last but not least, canola oil. So we want to be wary of refined canola oil because it contains trans fats and all the potential health risks that are associated with trans fats. So again, I really enjoyed sharing all of this information with you. And if you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out on the Slack channel, and I will see you guys over there.